Hello, and welcome to the Blue Waters webinar. I'm Scott Lathrop with the Blue Waters Project at the University of Illinois. It's my pleasure today to introduce Andy Terrel, the president of NumFOCUS, to talk about an approach to sustaining scientific software. Welcome, Andy, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate being invited to speak here. So I'm going to present on NumFOCUS, which is an organization that was started in 2012, 2011, 2012 timeframe from a group of scientists and software developers who came together to try to see if we could expand our software projects beyond just our research and also incorporate a larger community and sustain the software projects as it goes. Over those last 5-6 years, we've seen our projects used in everything from Netflix to NASA. We've seen large scientific initiatives, and we've learned a lot about building the community and like what needs are needed for the people who are in our software projects and the different constituents. And so I'll just go through today kind of like, our motivation, why we're here, what we do, and then kind of take questions from folks. I believe we have YouTube questions and Slack and some other places that you can ask questions, and Scott will pass them on to me to answer as we go. So to get started, I like to kind of start with what the mission of NumFOCUS is. Our mission is very clearly kind of stated, pointed at science and scientific research. We believe that we need to advance science and advance and accelerate discovery. We need to promote sustainable, high-level programming languages, open code development, and reproducible scientific research. And so everything we do, we look at the software project level. We look at how that affects the scientists, and often when we make choices, if it comes down between corporations or science or education, we will direct our kind of mission towards the scientist versus other entities. And I'll go into a little bit of that later. So how do we accomplish this mission? We have basically 4 different tracks that we look at in creating programs. First off, we have a lot of educational programs like scholarships, diversity programs, sustainability programs, helping teach people how to build codes, how to bring a large community, and getting the right people together to advance the scientific projects. Additionally, we have a lot of meetups and conferences and events. It turns out that one of the best places to collaborate is in person or at least in some live medium. And getting those things organized takes a lot of work that a lot of software projects just don't have time to put into. So at this point, I think we're running around 7 or 8 individual project conferences, as well as conferences as our own. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Probably the thing that most people are aware of that we do is fiscal sponsorship. And so this is the legal and fiscal frameworks for which we're able to take money from corporations and other and individuals and things like that. And it provides like our projects kind of a cohesive framework for interacting with the corporations and government entities and such. And finally, we look at the community challenges. We try to be a leader in the data science and scientific computing communities. We come from these communities where, while some of us have moved on to different either roles in corporations or academia or government, we all kind of feel it where our home is in the scientific computing and data science realms. And so very much trying to keep abreast of the things we do there. So with that, I usually like to start with just a kind of a overview of like where my motivation came from as the president and longtime contributor to NumFOCUS. And I start by like how we touch humanity a bit. And I think that some of these stories are going to hit pretty well with the Blue Waters and CSA folks, because there's a lot of overlap in some of the work you guys do. So probably the last project I worked on in academia before I left to the startup world was modeling for Hurricane Sandy. And as we all know, Hurricane Sandy was one of the biggest economic disasters in our last 10, 15 years. And we knew a lot about it coming, and we prevented a lot of death and destruction because of the things we knew what was coming. And that wasn't by accident. It was kind of a community who had been studying for a long time the effects of hurricanes and the effects along the coast. I always like to point out, like, we talk about IoT and data science, and here's an example of like these buoys that were out in the Atlantic Ocean since the 70s, all collecting data, transmitting it back and forth to our servers, and understanding the waves of the ocean very well. And we've been using data science techniques to solve these Euler equations and shallow water equations for a long time, and putting them on very large computers like the one here at TAC, where I was at doing this modeling in previous life. So all the things that we've done in science to help prevent disasters is also replicable in government and business. And it's also very similar to what you see like in the headlines of like big VCs and big companies talking about them doing. So, IoT, data science, big computers. On from my experience as a research scientist, I moved it to work with lots of people at DARPA studying human trafficking. And in this case, doing the same sort of analysis and studying, in this case, the internet and the black market, we're able to identify a lot of human trafficking cases and able to go find a lot of people who were a lot of victims in desperate need. So the problem domain looks quite a bit different. We're no longer mining waves on the ocean floor. We're pulling data from the internet, and our algorithms are no longer necessarily a PDE, but it is a whole mix of algorithms that we would end up using. In this case, I show the scikit-learn algorithms cheat sheet of all the different algorithms used to understand it and model what is happening on the internet there. In that same vein, we are using large computers still. They look quite a bit different than perhaps what an NCSA type system might look like. But at the same time, a lot of the techniques that are used in running very large systems are replicated in cloud hardware or other kind of typical data centers. These kind of projects have been replicated by many groups in different places. I have stories of the Philae lander when it crashed. People were talking about a lot of the thermal imaging coming from Python codes. Worked with a group that did stroke detection on the Circle of Willis, and you can see the arteries here. We've seen groups using our codes to find pitting points in glaciers. And the LIGO survey is also using quite a bit of our code. So in all of this, the question kind of comes back is, where is the software project? We hear the big kind of overarching goal of predicting disasters and helping fix efficiencies in governments and helping medical people. But at the core, we believe that there's a lot of the software that runs this is the thing driving a lot of the innovation. And we wanted to support this. And I always like to give the analogy of C3PO here and R2D2, who in this massive galactic war, often the key piece to bringing down the giant starship or making sure a ship comes up or things like that. And without them, they just wouldn't, the heroes of these massive successes would not be able to achieve what they do. And so where is a software project? Here's what I guess the DARPA would encode as the traditional innovation pipeline. And you have it flows kind of through a scientific discovery, an archival paper, which often is what's credited in academia. You also have some technical innovation, maybe from that paper, maybe you have patents, maybe you have some other thing that can be transferred to either operations or some business. And then you also have like that follows from that as an engineered code and integration with the actual business or human problems being solved. This kind of traditional pipeline, I think, has served us well for many years. But my personal belief is that we're moving away from that, where we want to see a little bit more wholer ecosystem. So very often the scientists are creating those engineered codes. Very often the technical innovation actually has more code as a part of it, and it could very well be the result of code throughout it. But the archival paper still needs to live in this ecosystem, and I think there's been some desire to say, why don't we just hold up the codes instead of just the papers? But in fact, they kind of go hand in hand, and they're an ecosystem that allows the use of both of these artifacts is, I think, critical to the success of like sustaining our full ecosystems. And in that, when we have human problems, very often, if you have the human problem at the end of a pipeline, you don't have the feedback you need to actually build out a better ecosystem, or making scientific discovery as relevant as possible for perhaps the humans who are funding it or other things. Now, if you take this notion of like we build an ecosystem where there's a lot more transparency between the different artifacts and people involved in different types of professions, you can also apply this to the business world as a whole. And I think when you look at agile methods and more business processes that have rapidly evolved over the last 10 years, you see that the business is starting to move towards being more inclusive of engineering and discovery, as well as the rapid feedback between the user and the domain experts. Okay, so NumFOCUS is really trying to come and build this innovation ecosystem, and in a way that respects all people involved and all parties involved, and also keeps the interests of the scientist at the heart, so that we can continue to discover new scientific achievements and so forth. But so how do we do that? And then let me give you just a snapshot into who we touch and how much like the impact that can be thus far early in our life of our organization. So perhaps the first group of folks that we kind of touch daily is our sponsored projects. So in this case, a sponsored project is a project that's come and said, we need to sustain, we need money, we need governance, we need help organizing ourselves, and we want to do it together so that we can share the burden of fiscal and legal services and perhaps even fundraising and so forth. And so we have two classes of projects. We have our sponsored projects and our affiliated projects, where our sponsored projects are ones who actually need fiscal services immediately, whether to hire a developer, to buy services on, like, for example, continuous integration and so on and so forth. And also legal help, such as some of these projects are in Europe, and figuring out how to work with European and American legal entities is always something that you need a professional to come help with. And so we have 20-ish projects that we work with on a daily basis to promote and help them organize in different ways, ranging from NumPy, which is a underlying code that touches, I think, millions of developers, to astrological discoveries with YT and SunPy. So going from the very broad to the very narrow domains and helping the wider community. In that, we've also brought on a lot of projects that are affiliated with us, but maybe haven't had that need for the full fiscal life cycle yet. And this is kind of a recognition that some projects, for example, the Dash by Plotly, the project that's fairly new project, only a few years old, is already seeing a need for help organizing and perhaps small grants, but doesn't have the full fiscal need. And so just helping the life cycle of a project evolve in a way that's actually helpful to that project rather than maybe being forced into a corporate structure or a university structure or something like that. So we have a number of these projects that come on very easily and say, if you have a basic code base and a community around you, will say, come on and we can help you organize, be part of all of our programs, and perhaps maybe we don't spend as much time on legal and fiscal services, but you do see the fullness of the ecosystem. From that, our corporate sponsors are a huge part of our organization. These corporate sponsors represent people who've invested in the success of these projects. It's not always the case that they want a new patch to NumPy, or maybe Jupyter to have the Jupyter notebook to have some widget or something. Really, what they want is to create an ecosystem that helps them do their jobs as well. And so we also have the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation and the Sloan Foundation, or two organizations who've come out and said we really want to help build data science and open science ecosystems. So our corporate sponsors are not as like a one-way street. We actually try to engage with them through our advisory boards, through our summits and whatnot, to get their feedback on where the community could go to help these projects. But as opposed to some other organizations, we try not to put them in the driver's seat. We try to put them in the advisory seat and help the ecosystem. So I think one of probably the striking differences between NumFOCUS and other software foundations is that we're very much separated from like what corporate interests are, and we're very much like in trying to be as close to the scientific interests as possible. But it's not really feasible without having a strong sponsorship network. And so I think we've done a lot of work trying to find the folks who are interested in the core tools rather than perhaps the flashy demos and things like that. And finally, I think probably the most important group that we really work with is our supporting members. And a lot of the folks who come to us are either data scientists or scientists who use codes who want to see the ecosystem exist. I think for me, my work would not be possible without these tools that we've built and supported over the years. And I think that that's true of many scientists. And so we see that through numerous interactions in our events, at our on our campaigns for, like, we usually have a year-end campaign where we bring in supporting members, and throughout the year of people who contribute in different ways to these projects. And I think that these members are also often left aside in the traditional kind of open source software world, where you have to give code or have some contribution, but that takes a lot of time and energy to like go through all the organizational process to contribute to an open source code. Supporting members gives a way for people to give through many other kind of ways, whether it's event organization or donations and so forth. And so when you try to like look at the ecosystem of a scientific code, getting all of these members together is a fairly monumental task. And so NumFOCUS as an organization has kind of become a place that people can kind of do that and not necessarily have to do every piece of the marketing and management of the corporation and supporting memberships. To kind of like give some numbers and dollars to this, for example, we have one event that we run throughout the year. This is our 2016 numbers because I didn't have our 2017 numbers together, which are all kind of, I think, about 50% larger if we look at our 2017 numbers. But we run 9. This is an event that gets run through usually by city. Sometimes like there's a country version, but a local event coming and showing the Python data science tool suites, and often we have Julia and other tools available as well. And it's done a good job of getting local participation between the the corporate sponsorships and the local industries and so forth. Did the sound change? Is that, you still hear me okay? Okay, it just stopped. So in this case, we have 9 events across 7 countries, 300 plus speakers, thousands of attendees. The number I like to show is like we have of these about 10% are scholarship driven. So we try to bring in a diverse set of folks from different scholarships and whatnot. And on top of that, we were able to generate about $250,000 of revenue for the projects that we the whole of NumFOCUS. And that's just from our one kind of branch of events. We're also helping, that ran JupyterCon and StanCon and JuliaCon. So we're trying to help even individual organizations implement this model to their specific projects. In addition to like conferences, we also have kind of a homegrown group that we have meetups throughout the world. And the way we kind of run this is like we use platforms like meetup.com and we use Slack and other kind of commercial tools that are able to connect a very large array of folks, and with a few kind of basic guidelines of like respecting the community and having an open source spirit and things like that, we're able to like make it possible for people to have a meetup and talk about these tools and these kind of concerns throughout the world. And so now we have almost 60,000 members through 35 countries. And not every one of these groups meets every month or every week or on a great basis, but kind of giving the opportunity for leadership in places like the Philippines and Indonesia and Singapore, trying to give some place for them to the rest of the world to be connected, I think is very important. It's very hard to do in many other institutional settings. And so it's another place where NumFOCUS strives to kind of spread our projects and our the world throughout the world to understand who we are and what we do. Okay, so that's kind of like the mission, why we're here, like who we're serving, the kind of the ecosystem we kind of went through. Maybe I should pause. Is there any questions? Because what I'd like to do is go into some of like more meaty kind of details, but.
Just a reminder, if anyone has a question, you can post to the live chat on YouTube or to the Slack channel, but no questions yet, Andy.
Cool. All right, so I thought I would just go through what like kind of our functioning principles of like how we kind of operate and like how we grow this community and what we do. And we put down that we have basically 4 kind of principles around the projects we work on. And like I've always been very kind of I have a core belief that the software project and the projects as a whole is kind of where our core group is, that our core customer on supporting. And we kind of looked at this and says like projects need funding is like a first kind of step, and there's always a lot of question of like what do they need funding for, and I think that one thing that's kind of come clear is that just having money doesn't really help a project succeed. But a lot of projects have turned into such critical infrastructure they need funding for the maintainers of the project, the folks who are checking new bugs or helping new algorithms be implemented into the mainline code bases. And so that's certainly one place where it's very easy to say we can throw money at the problem, but it's not quite that. You actually need funding for the kind of core daily kind of what it is to do a job. It's very different from getting lots of contributors. I won't say easy, but it's a different kind of attitude in this like large ecosystem. If you have a contributor who gives a few patches or a few tweaks and finds some bugs and helps, that's really great. But and we want to encourage that, but at the same time, need that funding, those things to be brought into the community and exposed to the rest of the community well. We also put down that we need stability. I think a lot of projects kind of have a challenge saying that they'll be around for the next 5 years or so. I see. I guess one of the types of projects we struggle with to support is the 2 grad students built a piece of code that did some analysis for a PhD thesis, but where is that code going to be in the next 5 years? By having NumFOCUS provide organizational support and other benefits of like a board and an organization that is committed to the longevity of this ecosystem, we do provide a place for stability. We do provide, like, if you come on a project, it's not going to be something that disappears overnight. It's not going to, there's a kind of set guidelines where if you change licensees and decide you have to start paying, like that's just not going to work under our structure and things like that. So the stability of the clients or the people who use the software and the people who contribute to the software is fundamental to a project really kind of being able to succeed. The third one is we believe a project really needs its independence to decide its technical direction and its direction as a project. Very well could be that a project needs to make a major shift in order to serve the needs of science and other communities. And by having a very loose structure, we try to, as far as like licenses and kind of operating procedures and things like that, we try to let the organization itself kind of drive that. And I always like I worked with the pilot folks at one point, and it was always kind of like science by scientist or scientific code by scientists kind of mentality of sometimes it really is you need to rewrite the whole code to use a different MPI library, or maybe you just need it to only work on your laptop and that sort of thing. And so like being able to like let the scientist drive how the needs of the project work is very important. And that's one reason we've always remained a 501c3, which is a public charity versus a lot of private charities in the space that don't necessarily have the public kind of viewpoint on like let the public do always for the public good. So anyways, it's a minor technical detail. And also like logistics support, just the amount of like, kind of work it takes to find the right person to even give your purchase order to, or make sure that can you work with the university's procurement offices and all sorts of the administration function it takes to support large projects is something that we've been able to help projects with quite a bit. I think that a lot of small projects will find that, oh yeah, I don't need very much, I can do a lot of this by myself. But as you grow, the work of logistics starts to be quite large, and if you don't have a good sustainable mechanism for taking on that load, you will find the burden kind of overwhelming. To do this, we also some major kind of pieces that we also add to meet these project needs is one is the fiscal and legal services. We have lots of contracts with lots of lawyers who specialize in open source needs, specialize in doing negotiation with corporations and so forth. There's also a lot of our work we're starting on sustainability and engaging Like what are the common themes, like types of business models or types of plans for um, engaging the community, and bringing more people into your community, and also having a voice in perhaps even legislation and kind of larger leadership of at the table of like big science decisions and things like that. And finally, we're a big believer in community, so we try to make sure that everything we do has a community feel to it, trying to bring in tools that help people collaborate in a community fashion and through lots of events and discussions online. So I think this is probably, this reminds me of the first episode of the Silicon Valley, where the young gentleman gets a check and says, all right, what do I do with this check? So if you have a great idea and you've implemented some project and now someone wants to give you money, it's actually not, it's just taking the money sometimes becomes a little bit of a challenge. And so this is where like we kind of started with our organization of like, all right, what if we were able to go raise, I believe like, for example, data carpentry and software carpentry is $2 million grant. How do they even take that money and have the reporting structures to be audited and so on and so forth as a project, not necessarily as, one option has always been use your university, but as a project itself that spans multiple universities, spans multiple continents even. How do you even manage this? And so I guess for us, our first fiscal sponsor project was Python. And a lot of a large donation came from Microsoft, and we were able to kind of get the signed contracts and legal and disbursement of funds to contractors. And right now I think we have 40 different contractors throughout these projects that we help, everything from taxes to employment benefits and things like that. So in our fiscal services, like some folks, I think when you're just starting out, you might not think about like all the different types of fiscal needs you'll have. This is definitely not a comprehensive list, but just, licensing. I think, for example, the Python name fell into some troubles once someone decided to start using their name on to sell some sort of server type thing that had nothing to do with the language. How do you manage that and trademark disputes? I think even if you have a trademark, it doesn't really matter if you don't have a legal team that's going to help you protect that trademark. If you'll lose your trademark if you allow people to not protect it for you, or if you don't go out and send out some sort of either some way of like resolving these disputes. And they come up more than we'd like, but having an organization help kind of manage that's very important. And kind of, I think I've gone through most of this list already, but there's a lot of different small pieces that our staff does on the back end to really make sure everything kind of comes through. Now, all right, just getting money and just getting fiscal services doesn't really make your project survive. It's one path to making things amenable to accepting more reward for what you're doing. But the truth of the matter is, like, you also have to make your project survive from an organizational standpoint. For example, in our sustainability program, we're looking at a lot of like governance documents. How do you actually say who gets what say in different in the case that you do bring on money? Is it all of a sudden one organization, especially if you have a good example is NumPy, which is spread throughout the world, and they recently received money that went through the Berkeley BIDS data science initiative. And so all of a sudden now you have Berkeley becoming the hot point of like all NumPy activity. And what does that mean for perhaps the folks at INRIA in France? And now do they no longer have a say because all of a sudden all the money for developers has gone to Berkeley? And so having a way to take on developers and still have consensus and decision making throughout your organization. And we have like several of our major projects have kind of gone through a lot of these steps to say, all right, what if we bring money on? How will that change the organization? To project management, like how do we actually even knowing what we're building when we're building it? I think a lot of our organizations struggle to really kind of understand what is the most important thing for us to build. Like just this morning, I was looking at a thread at SciPy asking like, how are we going to get some of these major projects done when we're always just chasing bugs? And in that, actually, something that's kind of come up in a lot of our larger projects is the role of the community manager in open source. I think that we even have like a set of groups, a set of our projects that the community managers get together every month and talk about issues that they have, kind of raising awareness of different issues across projects and so forth. And so even like at that level, like supporting like what we're building, why we're building it, and managing the community to understand how that affects them. At JupyterCon, for example, we saw a lot of usability studies that were being done by kind of this project management piece, which is not a typical thing you see at scientific computing conferences. In addition, I think something that's been a big, maybe a little bit controversial, but also kind of a point that's missed by lots of folks is kind of just building like codes of conduct and codes of ethics and what do you expect from these software projects? I think a lot of folks, as they start investing their career and their lives in software projects that effectively just live on the internet, there's a real lack of confidence if there isn't some kind of code of ethics or conduct in among the group that works together. And I think that's definitely one kind of aspect that projects that aren't under an umbrella often necessarily don't kind of appreciate. Because of that, we've seen a lot of diversity in our projects, and I think if you come to some of the NumFOCUS led projects or events, like you'll see a very diverse set of scientific coders, whereas in a lot of places in the past where we just got together, it would kind of be a monoculture or a very small segment. And we look at this from the kind of the community and like the trust the community gains by having codes of conduct and codes of ethics between folks and a strong governance project. And so even like all these kind of small details that you might not care about when you're trying to write that archival paper become very important when you start to try to grow your project to survive throughout the entire life cycle of a project. And then even beyond that, like trademark and branding, I mean, do people know who you are? I mean, you just look at the number of GPU arrays we have, like it's definitely a case of just trying to get people together, or the number of mesh libraries that we have. It's getting people aware of like what the tools are that you can use, and kind of showing the community is also something that NumFOCUS has been able to help kind of guide those discussions, but also just like many other organizations that inside the academic institutions. So inside, once you get like kind of your project to the point where it really can sustain and move beyond maybe details that are hard to like grow beyond, such as not having a code of conduct or not knowing what effect money would have into your project, then there really becomes a moment where a project can start increasing their public engagement, increasing their interaction with the community. And this kind of goes back and forth of like, all right, you bring in money, you make an organization can sustain, you start engaging the public, and then you also feed back to finding places where you can help the public and the community more, and more opportunities for funding. For today, in today's kind of world, like social media becomes a huge part of this. Like actually the probably one more effective things we do of like getting people's names out is like we go to conferences and we have arrays of stickers, and I think we gave out like something like 50,000 stickers last year. and just giving people something to engage. Like, I have a sticker, I put it on my laptop because I believe in the Jupyter Notebook, or I believe in that scikit-learn is the greatest project since sliced bread, or whatever. But also giving people that engagement through small things like social media and membership letters, and being able to say what you change, like announce your features and things like that through a kind of structured medium. And NumFOCUS kind of tries to bring up those best practices for engaging the rest of the community. And also, I think there's also kind of a barrier to a lot of projects if the only engagement you have is to file an issue on GitHub, or only find the right email address that gets the person who cares about your problem. And so bringing up, once you have like an established community, bringing them up and making them more aware of how to engage in that community in a way that's productive for both the contributors, the maintainers, and the users of those projects, I think is a huge kind of topic for projects at NumFOCUS that we continually work to refine. I think I've mentioned all these previously, but just kind of like our educational programs, it really is we more inclusive. We look at a lot of, like, the universities do a lot of work to try to educate and build science and build discovery, but we kind of look at the software projects of like, well, here's all the things that we think is lacking in that kind of structure, such as specific software conferences, workshops to perhaps push out features on your codes that are critical to like core maintenance bugs and things like that. Sprints, hackathons, Google Summer of Code. We've pushed a lot of young people through programs that help them learn the skills to write software and do it in an immersive environment. We actually have several projects that just run their own Google Summer of Code like projects, so that they can bring new students up through like actually writing code and get the experience of contributing on a daily basis. And then more of our social kind of digital media type things with like videos, meetups, and digital communities. The kind of like the range of people, I was going to put everyone's picture on here, but it's grown so large that they would be very, very small. So just to kind of like give you kind of an idea of how many folks are involved. So we now have a staff of around 5 people. We have like 6 board of directors who kind of work with the staff to implement a lot of the goals and needs of the community. On top of that, we have an advisory council that comes from kind of prominent members of the community and the corporate donors to kind of come and review the programs and to figure out ways that we can also promote things together and grow the ecosystem. We have a sustainability advisory board currently, which is really looking at sustaining issues and trying to produce documents to help projects kind of have a kit for learning all the things that we've learned over the last 5 years to help them sustain and become better organizations overall. We have the Diversity and Scientific Computing Committee, which I think has grown. I don't even have a number right now. We had a recent unconference, and I think it's grown to I think 30 to 50 people on the mailing list. But and there, one of the primary goals right now is just to come back and say, how do you create a diverse event? How do you create a diverse place that's safe for everyone to come and contribute in a professional way without maybe only creating a monoculture or creating or shunning certain voices because they didn't feel necessarily safe to make their voice heard. In that Pi Data Logistics Committee, we have logistics committees for all of our events. While we're able to provide a framework for hosting event and the kinds of content and the types of interactions and media, that's very easy to do on a almost templated basis. We still need people on the ground who know the local community, who know like the best venues, who can find influencers within the communities to help come be a part of the local organization. And so that's where we have logistic committees throughout the world on pretty much every kind of more or less the way it works is that you have a meetup group that turns into a full conference, and so it's kind of an evolution from those. And so that one you'll see on the order of 20 people per conference who kind of engage in trying to build our ecosystem. And then like everybody who's part of these projects, every project we bring on has 3 to 5 leads who are there to shepherd the project through any issues that come up or any money decisions, financial decisions. And those project leads take on the extra burden of, all right, we have this governance document. How do we maintain that it actually is upheld? And how do we maintain when there is a challenge in our community, such as to a fight or some incident or things like that? And so our project leads really work to keep each of our projects at a high quality, but also at a welcoming community through all the different templates and structures that we've come together to approve and agree upon. So it's a lot of people at this point. All of this comes down to about 5 people who get paid to do this, but most of us are all volunteers to kind of raise everybody up. And but we do have quite a number of contractors we've been able to pull into through funding of these projects to get some of the work done as well. So that's my presentation. I'm open to taking questions, and always you can find us on our website. And I think there's lots of places to engage and learn to become membership, learn about corporate sponsorship and our events.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Just a reminder to those watching, if you have a question, you can post to the Slack channel if you're connected there, or to the live chat on YouTube. One question comes up, Andy. Someone said you've clearly learned a lot. How do we learn your best practices? Do you do workshops? Is there a publication? How do we learn what you've learned?
Right, and so that one of the goals of the sustainability program right now is to take a lot of those learnings and create I think they call it an OSNAP, open source sustainability package. I've forgotten the full name. So we are working on documents, and that's something that the Sloan and Moore Foundation have been very keen on us producing documents and templates that can come through the rest of the community can access. There's also we have a mailing list that's not super active, but if you post there, a lot of people will kind of point you in the right directions. For example, if you want to look at the government's documents, there's effectively, because we try to keep this independence, we have several examples of folks who've really kind of shown and have a large discussion around why they picked certain aspects of their organizational documents. I can point you to those pieces. But coming to the mailing list and asking questions is kind of a first kind of place. We also have several other channels, such as a discuss board. We have some chat board, a Zulip chat board, I believe. And so there's some activity going on there, but definitely coming to one of our conferences, being on the mailing list, asking about where to engage is all possible. But if you ever have a question that's maybe not appropriate for any of those, info@numfocus.org is monitored by our staff, and often we get a lot of questions from folks of how can I help in this piece or there, and we point them in the right direction.
Okay, one more question that's emerged. We have a software project. Can you describe the process we have to go through to get involved?
So if you have a software project, there's kind of a few criteria we use to judge whether or not we can take on some of the overhead of supporting you. The first one has to be within the mission of a scientific software project. I think we have a lot of projects that come to us that kind of fit but don't exactly fit, and because we have such limited resources, we try to keep towards projects that are fundamentally a science oriented project. Now I've worked with several organizations to find other software foundations that could help them. A good example is the Read Write Web or Read the Docs. they came in, like a lot of scientists use read the docs, but it's not like science specific, so it's very hard for us to push our resources to it. But at the same time, we found several other fiscal sponsorship organizations that could help them out. So if you fit the mission, then there's, I mentioned there's several layers of projects. There's the fiscal sponsored projects, and then there's the affiliate projects. Affiliate projects, we just look, do you have a large community, and meaning not just two or three people. If you're at the level of a project that's 2 or 3 people, we're probably not the right spot for you just yet, just because it takes quite a bit of effort to actually get people using your project, and we don't want to necessarily have the bandwidth to maintain all the requirements for every project that's out there. But as you grow, like definitely join like the community and learn about what we do. But as you come to a substantial number of folks, and there's not like a hard number, but it's definitely more than 10 contributors, but maybe not necessarily have to be like hundreds. We have the affiliated projects where you can come on and say, all right, we want to grow our community. That'll immediately allow you to be in part of our project. So we have grants that we'll give out, like small grants to help offset costs of infrastructure and whatnot. It'll also get you in and let you be a part of our Google Summer of Code projects and things like that. So there's a number of benefits of just being an affiliate. The one thing it doesn't do is give you that independence as a fiscal organization. You'd still be all your fiscal decisions would still have to flow through our board, and that's just to preserve the IRS 501c3 status. And the others is you have to have some organizing docs with a code of conduct, which is it doesn't have to be like an amazing like document. It just needs to be like some like basic documents that show what happens in that. And this is kind of outlined in our on our web page a little bit better. So those 3 kind of pieces, our mission, our community, and some organizing docs and code of conduct together. From there, to be affiliate, you be on the board, and that's very kind of baseline. What we'll end up doing is signing a document that has some like the leaders of the project who are going to maintain these things that we just discussed. If you have a software project that's much larger, for example, when we brought in the Jupyter project, which spans 1,000 contributors across 4 continents, kind of thing, we then need to appoint a board of 5 independent people who are going to maintain like the structure of the same 3 principles we just talked about: the structure, your mission, your community, and your governance. And from there, we'll set up basically an account for you and be able to receive money and hire people and on your behalf effectively. And so, but the organization, that 5-person leadership board is the one who's responsible for the fiscal and legal decisions that your group makes. And so that's kind of the major kind of difference between independence from any kind of organization other than the project itself versus kind of being maybe growing under the guidance of our board and other fiscal kind of determinations. And I think a lot of folks find that the affiliation status is just fine for them. Where it really kind of changes is when you want to start hiring your own developers who report to the project as a whole. And so that's when we look at, all right, can we find 5 people that can maintain these core kind of requirements to be a part of our sponsored project list?
Okay, I don't think there are any other questions. So at this point, I'll ask everyone to join me in thanking Andy for a very informative presentation. Thank you very much. I want to alert you to the next 2 upcoming webinars next week, January 31st. There'll be a Blue Waters overview describing the resources and services offered by the Blue Waters project. And then February 7th, Aaron Saxton will be talking about machine learning using TensorFlow. I just want to remind you, we welcome your comments and suggestions for further topics and how we can make the webinar series most useful to you. With that, I'll thank you and hope to see you at the next webinar.